With those words, Michael's star moved just slightly forward and began to fire at the 1st Thorin Regiment. True to their orders, none of Archer's troops returned fire, but began to fall back. A pair of silvery streaks from the Behemoth's Gauss rifle tore outward at Katya's command company. A lightweight Scarabus toppled backward, spewing a thin cloud of grayish smoke from the gaping holes in its torso. The story of the Stone Rhino starts long before the 100-ton battlemech's first ponderous steps off an assembly line in 2847. Its lineage stretches beyond the clan homeworlds, the Pentagon planets, and even Kerensky's fateful choice to take the SLDF far from the approaching carnage of the collapsing Star League. In the dark days of 2775, just 5 years before the complete decimation of his empire, Stefan Amaris knew he had to take risks if he was going to find a way to defeat the seemingly unstoppable SLDF juggernaut. When the plan was proposed to build a battlemech so massive that it would test the limits of current technology and offered unparalleled firepower, it was exactly the sort of gamble that could end up paying off with piles of dead olive-green battlemechs. Amaris Arms Corporation on Terra, under the leadership of Senior General Rifkin Amaris, was tasked with the job of turning the idea into a functional prototype. Timeframes were tight and unreasonable, and the working conditions intolerable, but Amaris wanted that mech ready should the SLDF reach Terra. The design, designated the SAM RS-2 Matar, weighed in at 110 tons and was envisioned as a barely mobile weapons platform that could kill even the heaviest of SLDF mechs in a volley or two. The 220 Fusion engine allowed for a top speed of just 32.25 km per hour, which made the Matar one of the slowest battlemechs ever created. With just 10 tons of the total mass dedicated to an engine, mass could be allocated elsewhere. 20.5 tons of standard armor plate wrapped the Matar's succulent internal bits, which made it a pretty tough target to bring down. 14 double heat sinks provided a decent amount of cooling for what would end up being an astounding amount of offensive weaponry. In a loadout that will be familiar to the fans of the Stone Rhino, the Matar was built around 2 Gauss rifles nestled in the mech's side torsos. Considerable effort went into burying them in the mech in order to protect the sensitive capacitors from incoming fire and to conceal the mech's true loadout. Designers even briefly flirted with the idea of adding covering hatches to conceal the barrels until the mech was ready to fire. Backing up the twin Gauss rifles were a pair of large pulse lasers split between the left and right arms. These were seen as valuable finisher weapons and insurance against light mechs that might venture too close. An ER large laser was also placed in the center torso to bolster the long-range fire. 2 flamers split between the side torsos provided opportunities to barbecue infantry and light vehicles. Oh, and a medium pulse laser was added to the head, which faced the rear firing arc. Finally, a Guardian ECM was added to the left leg in hope of providing at least some countermeasure for the lumbering mech from enemy fire support. 16 shots fed each Gauss rifle, which was deemed enough for a mech that was rarely going to leave the confines of its defensive positions. All things seen, it was an impressive loadout, and one that would have been quite deadly on the battlefield if fielded against the SLDF. Unfortunately for the aspirations of the Amarises, the mech was an abject failure. The prototype was rife with issues stemming from the Matar's 110-ton mass. The leg actuators could not absorb the stress of the forces being placed upon them and failed time and time again. Like any good leaders, the response from the Amarises was to blame underlings for the failures and refuse to take any personal responsibility. Sounds familiar. Accused of treasonous incompetence, the Matar engineering team was executed for their inability to overcome the technical issues. The Matar development program was shuttered and resources diverted elsewhere. With the SLDF now closing on Terra rapidly, Rifkin Amaris sought to flee with a treasure trove of intelligence and technical documents. That flight was not successful, and he was captured and taken into custody by Kerensky's forces. The documents on this failed super heavy battlemech were added to a pile of every possible shape and form which joined Kerensky on the Exodus fleet. However, as you hopefully have guessed by this point, the story doesn't end here. In the 2840s, the Matar's technical documentation would see a second look in the hands of Clan Smoke Jaguar scientists who immediately identified an opportunity to succeed where Amaris had failed. Never underestimate a clanner's willingness to dump time and resources into proving they're better than the Inner Sphere. Turning what was known as Amaris' folly into a functional battlemech would be a stellar example, even if the Inner Sphere presumably would never know of its existence. Digging through the technical documentation, Clan Smoke Jaguar scientists sought to pick the wheat from the chaff. They identified the leg actuator issue as one that couldn't be reliably overcome, and one of the first changes was to drop the design specs down to just 100 tons. It would also receive a new name, the Stone Rhino. Around an appropriately named Star League Monster Steel chassis, a Heavy Force 300 fusion engine was installed. This pushed the new design to a blazing fast 54 kilometers per hour. Of course, this did come at the cost of weighing 19 tons, but at least it could keep up with the other Golden Century Clan assault battlemechs. 18 tons of compound 12A1 standard armor provided 288 points of protection. This was a slight step down from the Minotaur's protection, but that 10 tons of mech had to be made up somewhere. 10 double heat sinks were deemed adequate for what would be a balanced laser and ballistics loadout. Often overlooked and overshadowed by the Stone Rhino's weapons, the original loadout did devote 6 tons of mass to jump jets, which pushed the movement profile up to a 353. Perhaps the one thing more terrifying than a Stone Rhino lumbering in your direction is one leaping in your direction on plumes of plasmic fire. With functioning and reinforced actuators and solid redesign, the battlemech named after one of the heavily armored local animals from Eadeh sported an impressive array of weaponry. The two Thunderstroke Series 2B Gauss rifles were no longer nestled deep within the torsos, but projecting out over it to provide a high angle of fire. Backing them up were 2 large pulse lasers, which provided accurate high-damage fire. Finally, a small pulse laser in the head provided a nominal, bordering on symbolic level of short-range protection. The Stone Rhino stood in defiance of most of the plans to defeat it. An opponent couldn't stay at range without being pummeled by the Gauss rifle shots, and it couldn't close into short range without bringing the accurate large pulse laser fire into play. The best bet was to overwhelm the mech with numerous lighter and faster mechs that could collectively bring the Stone Rhino down before they could all be eliminated. The limitations of the Stone Rhino were its speed and the 16 rounds of Gauss rifle ammunition. The first was mitigated with the jump jets, and the other by the large pulse lasers, which helped the mech remain a potent fighter even when the ammo bins ran dry. When the Stone Rhino was first spotted in the Inner Sphere, it was among the forces of the Smoke Jaguars. Initially thought to be exclusive to the clan, it was later learned that most of the others fielded the Stone Rhinos as well, either purchased from the Jaguars or claimed through trials. During the battles on Tukayyid against the Comguard, the Stone Rhino was seen among assault stars of most of the clan participants. For those of you playing with the advanced rules for quirks, the Stone Rifle is a bit of a mixed bag. The barrel fists are nice, as well as the protected actuators, but the poor performance and weak head armor quirks lurk in the background like an unwanted party guest. The Blackthorns learned the local names for the unknown battlemechs that they had fought earlier. Many of the second-line clan mechs were simply refitted versions of standard Inner Sphere models and therefore bore the same name. The Rifleman look-alike was called the Galahad. The giant mech Rose and Bell fought was called the Behemoth. To Rose's dismay, he discovered that the garrison cluster had no less than 3 of the giants, maybe more. Even though the mechs were considered only second class, Rose had learned a healthy respect for the monsters. As far as variants go, this is another case where the numbering doesn't quite match the timeline due to the difference between when the loadouts were actually created and when they were first spotted operating within the Inner Sphere. For the purposes of the video, we're going to stick with the timeline. Please pardon the wonky numbering. Our first official variant ends up being the Stone Rhino 4, which was actually a testbed design for the Smoke Jaguars created before the official Stone Rhino 1 started production. Structurally, it looked similar except for the installation of an XL engine and the use of 17 single heat sinks instead of the 10 of the double variety. It also drops the armor to 16.5 tons from the original 18. The loadout included an interesting collection of long-range weaponry, but notably lacking any of the weapons later seen in the Stone Rhino 1. A pair of Ultra AC-10 autocannons sat in the left and right torsos, along with 4 long-range Missile 10 systems also evenly split between the sides. Backing them up in the mid and short range were 4 ER medium lasers and 4 machine guns split between the left and right arms. The Stone Rhino 4 benefited from case in all the appropriate locations, yet it didn't take long to discover that having at least 1 ton of exploding ammunition, even within case, in both arms and both side torsos was an issue. It's very clear that the Stone Rhino 4 was not intended for deployment, as it was far more vulnerable than the standard loadout released a year later. The Stone Rhino 5 is another testbed design from the Smoke Jaguars, also created in 2846. It also had an XL engine, but of a larger size, pushing the movement profile up to a 4.6. The jump jets were sacrificed to make this happen, unfortunately. 12 double heatsinks kept the mech relatively cool, although the loadout is going to test them. It also had just 16.5 tons of standard armor. 4 LB-5X autocannons split between the left and right torsos provided a modest long-range punch, though their value might really have been found as an anti-aircraft fire support role. In the mid and short ranges, 6 ER medium lasers can do quite a bit of damage, though firing all of them can push the mech's heat well into the red. It's an interesting take, but there's not much in the Stone Rhino 5 that would make it very much fun to play. The thought of rolling all those cluster round shots makes me a bit of a sad frog. The Stone Rhino 6 is our first alternate take of the mech following the primary loadout's release. It is also one that has a nasty reputation for being one of the cheesiest. Hardware-wise, we're looking at another upgrade to a larger XL engine along with the addition of 18 double heat sinks and the removal of 1 jump jet, dropping the movement profile to a 4.62. 16 tons of ferrofibrous armor keep this hotbox safe. The arms of the Stone Rhino 6 are largely just for show, as all 14 medium pulse lasers are contained within the left and right torso. That's right, 14. Let's do the math. 14 MPLs times 7 damage apiece, that's 98 possible damage at a -2 to hit. Of course, firing all of those medium pulse lasers at the same time generates 56 heat. A stationary Stone Rhino 6 would be looking at 20 heat into the red at the end of the turn. Thankfully, there's no ammunition to cook off, but the next turn would be an uneventful one with a significant movement and firing penalty, if not a complete shutdown. The Stone Rhino 6 absolutely deletes mechs from the field at short range, and your only chance is to hit it at long range before it can close. If your opponent is savvy enough to keep it sheltered early on, it will melt faces off. Oh, and there's an ER small laser in the head. Can't forget about that. Just think of the YouTube comments if I had. There would be no end to the gnashing of teeth. In 3001, the Stone Rhino 7 was developed in a clear attempt to release the mech from the constraints of ammo consumption. The standard fusion engine returned along with the 353 movement profile. 18 tons of armor kept the 7 cozy and safe, and a shocking 26 double heatsinks were needed to keep this energy boat build from getting too warm. The primary weapons were 3 ER large lasers distributed across the 3 torsos. These replaced the 2 Gauss rifles for roughly equivalent range and the same 30 possible damage. The 2 large pulse lasers split between the left and right arms were retained from the original loadout. Finally, an emotional support small pulse laser sits snugly in the battlemech's head. Of all the variants that existed up to this point in the timeline, the Stone Rhino 7 feels to me like the first that really does the mech justice while not getting cheesy. Your choice between the Gauss rifles and the ER large lasers is likely going to boil down to your personal preference, and if you want 2 15-point hits or are okay with 3 10-point damage hits. If you want to run a Stone Rhino but also want to mix things up a bit, give the Stone Rhino 7 a try. By 3061, I suppose it was inevitable that we would see a variant of the Stone Rhino that went all in on heavy laser technology. The Goliath Scorpions took the Stone Rhino design and resources they plundered from the obliterated Smoke Jaguars and made some considerable changes to both hardware and even the outward look of the battlemech. The XL engine makes its return, though the movement profile remains a 353. 19 tons of standard armor keep the mech's juicy internal bits on the inside. The mech's 16 double heatsinks would see extensive use as the large pulse lasers from the original loadout were replaced with 2 large heavy lasers which do 16 damage apiece, but at the cost of 18 heat generated per laser. The 2 Gauss rifles from the original build are still in the left and right torsos, adding to a rather impressive alpha strike potential. 2 heavy medium lasers join the larges in the arms, and 2 more are rear facing in the left and right torsos. 2 heavy small lasers are also split between the arms, and finally, an anti-missile system located in the head rounds out the build. Oh, and to keep the riffraff away, a couple of A-pods were added to the right and left legs. Similar to the Stone Rhino 6, most of the time mech warriors are not going to be alpha striking. Doing so at a front-facing target left the mech at 26 heat into the red, which would prompt a shutdown on a 10+ roll. More realistically, just firing the heavy large lasers and the Gauss rifles left the Stone Rhino 2 at 6+ heat, which is just shy of causing some issues the next turn. It's definitely not something that could be done for more than a couple of turns in a row. The The Stone Rhino 2, or Behemoth 2 if you prefer, saw extensive deployment among the Goliath Scorpions as second-line reinforcements. If you're running a Clan Goliath Scorpion or a Scorpion Empire unit and want to remain true to canon, check this variant out. Clan Hell's Horses has also been seen fielding it after claiming the production line on Tokasha. Speaking of, the Hell's Horses interpretation of the Stone Rhino is our next on the timeline. Arriving on battlefields starting in 3068, the Stone Rhino 3 sported an XL engine, 21 double heatsinks, and 19 tons of standard armor. The 353 movement profile was preserved. In a first for the mech, 2 advanced Tactical Missile 9 launchers took the place of the Gauss rifles in the left and right torsos. However, they played second fiddle to the mech's primary weapons, which were 4 large pulse lasers split evenly between the left and right arms. 2 rear-facing ER micro-lasers rounded out the build. The 21 double heatsinks could handle the 4 large pulse lasers firing while on the move, however, bringing in the ATM-9s would push the mech's heat into the red at 6 heat per missile rack. However, 40 possible damage at -2 to hit with the LPLs is hard to ignore. The 4 tons of ammunition for the ATMs would require decisions be made concerning ammo types, but overall it's not that bad. While not as egregiously cheesy as the Stone Rhino 6, the Stone Rhino 3 dances on that line a bit with the 4 LPLs. It's not a guaranteed friendship ender if you take it into the tabletop, but I would use it sparingly. Our last official variant is another Hell's Horses design, which arrived in 3128 and qualifies as our Dark Age entry. It's back to the standard fusion engine and just 10 double heatsinks, returning to form with the original loadout. 18 tons of standard armor provide plenty of protection. The standard Gauss rifles in the left and right torso, as well as the 2 large pulse lasers in the arms, are true to form. The last weapon is the small pulse laser in the head. The only serious change to the Stone Rhino 8 was the removal of the 3 jump jets and the addition of an actuator enhancement system to each arm. For the uninitiated, the AES system improves the to-hit roll for weapons located in the limb where it's placed. That means those 2 large pulse lasers were even more accurate with a -3 to hit rather than a normal 2. I am torn on the Stone Rhino 8 because I think pulling those jump jets is a big ask for a mech that is so perilously slow. If you feel it's worth it for that improvement on your 2 hit rolls, the 8 may be the variant for you. Otherwise, I would just stick with the original. The heat of the plane made the interior of the cockpit feel as if the whole mech were in jeopardy from internal heat rises. But its heat monitor showed the normal settings. Strange, softly grating sounds, the sand itself hitting and sliding across the mech's surface. Occasionally warring mechs, seen through the sands in the distance, looked like battle scenes out of some nightmare, with too many reds and confusing shadows. Damaged mechs stumbled past her to safe places where techs could manage makeshift battlefield repairs. For our Mech Frog variant, I wanted to use a weapon system that had up to this point not appeared on a Stone Rhino. No, not plasma weaponry, but I'm glad your head went there first. Instead, the Stone Rhino MF is built around a pair of Hyper Assault Gauss 20 rifles placed into the arms along with 3 tons of ammunition apiece. The 2 traditional large pulse lasers are still there, but they've been moved into the torsos far from any exploding Gauss rifle harm, thanks to Case. 2 medium pulse lasers are split between the left and right torsos, and an anti-missile system in the right torso will help keep the mech alive as it seeks to pummel its targets from great distances. All of this is made possible with an endosteel conversion and 15.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor. The 15 double heat sinks will keep the mech cool with consistent fire up to the point where you bring the medium pulse lasers into play. Then choices have to be made. I think the Stone Rhino MF would be a good addition to the possible loadouts for a mech which already has some really great choices in its pantheon. If you want to give it a try, I've included the record sheet for it in the video comments below. So why do we love the Stone Rhino? From its appearance on the cover of the 3055 technical readout to its recent arrival in Mechwarrior Online, the Stone Rhino definitely leaves an impression wherever it shows up. In universe, its impact has been limited, but I think it's due to the fact that lumbering fire support mechs don't really make for as an exciting a narrative as our heroes piloting heavy mechs that are swift and agile. The Stone Rhino remains one of the most recognizable 3055 designs, and it's interesting to see who cheers for it and who groans based upon their experience running into one on the battlefield. Thank you as always for coming by today to talk some BattleTech. It's been a pleasure to tackle some of these older mechs as we plow our way into 2024. If you have an experience with the Stone Rhino, good or bad, please do share it in the comments. I love hearing the feedback. If you felt the video was worthwhile, hitting that like and subscribe button makes it more likely to see more of my nonsense in the future. It also feeds my insatiable hunger for positive affirmation. Win-win, right? Taking the extra step to becoming a channel member more directly helps, just to make sure the BattleTech nonsense keeps flowing. Each video takes between 12 and 20 hours to complete, and if we can keep growing, I can keep justifying this passion project. Until we meet again, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.